When 9-year-old Leo was shoved towards a beat-up sedan at a dusty roadside gas station, his eyes locked with those of a massive biker pumping gas. The boy subtly shook his head, a tiny, desperate gesture, and whispered words the biker barely caught. He said he'd hurt my dog for Frank Diesel Morrison, a retired KR9 officer. That was more than enough. His gut feeling turned into cold certainty, setting off a chain of events that would see an entire motorcycle club descend on a lonely highway to save one boy and his puppy. The air at the Texaco off Highway 87 was thick enough to chew. It was a greasy cocktail of shimmering heat rising from the asphalt, the sharp tang of 87 octane, and the faint, sad smell of stale coffee from the attached convenience store. It was a place of transit, a temporary pause for travelers on their way to somewhere more important. No one stayed long. It was the last real stop for 50 miles in either direction, a concrete island in a sea of sun-scorched Texas scrubland. Frank Morrison, known to his brothers in the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club as Diesel, felt the sun beating down on the black leather of his cut. The club's insignia, a stoic iron skull clenched around a single rose, was stitched proudly on his back. At 48, Diesel was built like the machines he loved, solid, powerful, and designed for long, hard miles. A thick, graying beard covered a jawline that had been set in grim determination for most of his adult life. His hands, calloused from years of gripping handlebars and, before that, the leashes of police dogs, were steady as he topped off the tank of his Harley-Davidson Road King. He had been a KR9 officer for 20 years before a bad knee and an even worse bureaucracy had pushed him into early retirement. The badge was gone, but the instincts remained. They were etched into his soul, a permanent part of his operating system. He saw the world in terms of threats and vulnerabilities, of predators and prey. It was a heavy way to live, but it had kept him and his partners, both human and canine, alive. That's why he noticed the car. It was a tired-looking Toyota Corolla, one of its taillights cracked and patched with red tape. It pulled up to the adjacent pump with a squeal of worn brakes. A man got out of the driver's side. He was thin, with the kind of nervous energy that made Diesel's internal alarms hum. He wore a cheap, sweat-stained polo shirt and jeans that hung loosely on his frame. His eyes darted around the station, never settling, a sure sign of a man who was either running from something or deeply uncomfortable in his own skin. Then the passenger door opened, and a small boy was pulled out. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 9, was slight, with a mop of brown hair falling over his eyes. He wore a faded superhero t-shirt and shorts that seemed a size too large. In his hand, he clutched an empty dog leash, the red nylon a stark slash of color against the grimy pavement. The man's grip on the boy's upper arm was white-knuckled and possessive. It wasn't the gentle, guiding hand of a father. It was an anchor, a manacle. Diesel watched them over the top of his gas pump. The man, whose name was Gary, muttered something sharp to the boy, Leo. Leo didn't respond. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. There were no tears, no tantrum, none of the typical signs of a child being difficult. There was only a profound stillness, a quiet terror that was louder to Diesel than any scream. He knew that look. He had seen it on the faces of children pulled from broken homes. He had seen it in the eyes of his canine partners when they sensed danger long before he did. It was the look of a creature that had learned that fighting back only made things worse. Gary swiped a credit card at the pump, his movements jerky and impatient. He seemed annoyed by the simple mechanics of the transaction, as if the world itself were conspiring to slow him down. He didn't speak to the boy again, but the tension between them was a physical thing, a suffocating blanket in the already oppressive heat. Diesel finished with his tank, the nozzle clicking off with a final thud. He slowly screwed the cap back on, his movements deliberate, buying himself time to observe. The boy, Leo, hadn't moved a muscle. His gaze was fixed on the ground, his small hand still wrapped tightly around the empty leash. The leash was the detail that snagged in Diesel's mind. A kid that age, holding a leash that tightly, should have a dog attached to it, probably a wriggling, happy puppy pulling him in every direction. An empty leash was a question without an answer. The cop in him started building a file. The nervous man. The terrified, silent boy. The unnaturally tight grip. The empty leash. Each detail was a brick in a wall of wrongness that was growing higher and higher in his mind. He had seen 1,000 family squabbles in his career, tired parents dealing with cranky kids on long road trips. This was not that. This felt cold. It felt predatory. He swung a leg back over his bike, settling into the familiar worn leather of the seat. He didn't start the engine. He just sat, a silent, leather-clad sentinel, watching. His presence seemed to make Gary even more nervous. The man kept glancing over, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of fear and irritation. When the pump clicked off, Gary slammed the nozzle back into its cradle with unnecessary force. He grabbed Leo's arm again. "Let's go." "Get in the car." His voice was a low, menacing hiss that carried on the dry wind. Leo stumbled but didn't resist. As Gary shoved him toward the back door of the Corolla, the boy's head came up. For a fleeting second, his wide, frightened eyes met Diesel's. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered communication. In that gaze, Diesel saw a plea so profound it stole his breath. The boy gave the tiniest shake of his head, a gesture so small that anyone not looking for it would have missed it entirely. It was a clear and desperate no. Then, as Gary fumbled with the car door, his back momentarily turned, Leo's lips formed a few words. The sound was swallowed by the wind, but Diesel, trained to read lips in loud situations, caught the shape of them. And in a brief lull, a fragment of the desperate whisper reached his ears. "Hurt my dog." The words landed in Diesel's chest like ice shards. Everything clicked into place. The empty leash. The boy's terror. The man's desperate haste. The threat wasn't against the boy directly, it was something far more insidious. A predator knows to find the leverage point, the thing the victim loves most. For this little boy, that was his dog. The blood in Diesel's veins went cold. The lazy heat of the afternoon vanished, replaced by a chilling, absolute certainty. He was no longer a retiree on a quiet ride. He was an officer again, and a child was in danger. There was no more debate, no more weighing the odds of being wrong. He had his signal. He had his confirmation. Now, he had to act. He thumbed the ignition. The Harley roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shattered the gas station's quiet desperation. Both Gary and Leo flinched at the sound. Gary shot a furious, panicked look at Diesel, his face a mask of guilt and anger. Diesel didn't glare back. He didn't rev the engine. He simply put the bike in gear and rolled it forward, not fast, but with an unstoppable, deliberate momentum. He swung the heavy machine in a wide arc, positioning it directly behind the Corolla, blocking any chance of a quick escape. He had made his move. He had turned the gas station into a cage. Gary's face contorted in rage. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing? You're in my way," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Diesel swung his leg off the bike and stood, leaving the engine to idle its menacing rhythm. He was a mountain of a man, and the sun glinting off the chrome and his sunglasses made him look like something from a different, more dangerous world. He didn't answer Gary. Instead, he pulled his phone from the breast pocket of his cut. His thumb moved quickly across the screen. One call. That's all it took. "Preacher," he said, his voice calm and low. "I'm at the Texaco off 87. I have a situation here. A possible child endangerment, maybe an abduction. I need backup." Now there was no hesitation on the other end of the line. Preacher, the president of the Iron Sentinels, didn't ask for details. He didn't question Diesel's judgment. Trust within the club was absolute. How many, was all he asked. "All of them," Diesel replied. "Bring all of them." He hung up. Then he dialed 3 more numbers, 911. He gave the dispatcher the location and a concise, professional summary of his observations, finishing with his name and retired badge number to lend weight to the call. He knew the official response would take time. His brothers would be faster. Gary watched him, his face pale. The sight of the phone call had pushed him to the edge of his already frayed nerves. He abandoned his attempt to get Leo in the car and stalked towards Diesel. "You calling the cops? You have no right. He's my nephew. This is a family matter." "Is that so?" Diesel's voice was dangerously quiet. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He was a good head taller than Gary and outweighed him by 100 pounds of solid muscle. He let the silence hang in the air, a weapon in itself. He looked past the sputtering, panicked man and directly at Leo, who was still standing by the open car door, a small, frozen figure in the unfolding drama. "You okay, son?" Diesel asked, his voice softening just enough for the boy to hear. Leo didn't speak. He just stared, his eyes flicking from Diesel to Gary and back again. But in his gaze, there was a flicker of something new. "Hope." "You're in our way," Gary repeated, trying to sound tough, but his voice was thin and reedy. "Move your bike, old man, or I'll move it for you." The Diesel almost smiled. It was a cold, grim expression. "You can try." It was then that a new sound joined the thrum of Diesel's idling Harley. It started as a faint whisper on the horizon, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It grew steadily, resolving itself into the unmistakable, earth-shaking rumble of multiple V-twin engines. Gary heard it too. He looked down the empty highway, his face a canvas of confusion, which quickly morphed into dawning horror. Over the shimmering rise in the road, they appeared. First 2, then 4, then a whole phalanx of motorcycles, a wave of black leather and gleaming chrome cresting the hill and bearing down on the gas station. The iron sentinels had answered the call. They rode with a disciplined precision that spoke of countless miles traveled together. They fanned out as they entered the station, a silent, coordinated maneuver that effectively sealed every possible exit. They formed a loose, intimidating semicircle around the Corolla, their engines dropping to a rumbling idle that filled the air with a palpable sense of power. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their presence was a statement. Preacher, a man with a long grey ponytail and eyes that had seen everything, pulled his bike up alongside Diesel's. He killed his engine and looked at the scene. He nodded at Gary, then at the boy. "You called, brother," he said, his voice calm. Gary's bravado completely shattered. He was surrounded, trapped between a retired cop and a motorcycle club that looked like they chewed nails for breakfast. His face was slick with sweat. He was a cornered animal, and he knew it. Diesel ignored Gary's panicked stammering. He walked calmly towards the Corolla, his eyes fixed on the back window. "You said he'd hurt your dog," he said, his voice gentle but firm, directed only at Leo. "Where is he, son? Where's your dog?" Leo's chin trembled. He lifted a small, shaking hand and pointed to the back of the car. Diesel peered through the tinted rear window. In the suffocating heat of the cargo area, he saw it, a small, plastic travel crate. And inside, a tiny ball of golden fur was panting heavily, its sides heaving. A golden retriever puppy. It looked distressed, overheated, and terrified. A surge of cold fury, the likes of which Diesel hadn't felt in years, washed over him. Abusing a child was one thing. Using a helpless animal as a tool for that abuse was a line that, for Diesel, could not be crossed. It was the ultimate act of cowardly cruelty. He turned back to Gary, and his face was granite. "Open the car." It wasn't a request. You can't. That's my property." Gary squeaked. Before Diesel could respond, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the air. 2 county sheriff's cruisers were speeding down the highway, lights flashing. Diesel's 911 call was bearing fruit. The official cavalry was arriving. The deputies, a seasoned veteran and a younger officer, pulled in and saw the scene, a terrified man, a small boy, and a dozen formidable-looking bikers. They stepped out of their cars cautiously, their hands resting near their sidearms. The older deputy, a man with a weathered face and a name tag that read Sutton, took in the situation. His eyes met Diesel's. "We got a call about a possible child abduction." Diesel nodded, projecting an aura of calm professionalism he had perfected over 2 decades. Frank Morrison, retired SAPD, K-9 Division, he said, giving Sutton his old badge number. I observed the suspect, Gary here, handling the child aggressively. The boy gave me a nonverbal signal of distress and stated the suspect was threatening his dog. He pointed to the back of the Corolla. The animal is in a crate in the back. It appears to be in distress from the heat. Sutton's demeanor shifted. The mention of a specific division and a badge number, even a retired one, changed the dynamic. He was no longer dealing with a random biker, he was talking to a fellow professional. He looked at Gary, then at the boy, and his experienced eyes saw the same wrongness Diesel had. Sir, I need you to step away from the vehicle, Sutton said to Gary, his voice now firm with authority. Gary began to bluster, his story a tangled mess of his my nephew, and it's just a family misunderstanding, but his lies were thin and weak, and they evaporated under the stern gaze of the law and the silent judgment of the bikers. While Sutton dealt with Gary, the younger deputy, with Diesel's guidance, got the keys and opened the rear of the car. A wave of superheated air rolled out. Another biker, a large man named Wrench, gently lifted the crate out and placed it in the shade. He opened the latch, and the little golden retriever puppy stumbled out, panting and whimpering. The moment the puppy was free, Leo moved. The frozen stillness that had encased him shattered, and he ran, not to the deputies, not to any of the bikers, but to the dog. He fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around the small, furry body, burying his face in the puppy's soft fur. The tears he had held back for so long finally came, not in loud sobs, but in silent, shuddering waves of relief. Buster, he choked out. It's okay, Buster at the sight broke through the tough exteriors of everyone present. The bikers, men hardened by the road and by life, watched with a quiet reverence. Wrench produced a bottle of water and poured some into his cupped hand for the puppy to drink. Another biker's wife, who had arrived with the group, found a granola bar in her steel bag and quietly offered it to Leo. The standoff was over. The rescue was complete. With Gary now secured in the back of a patrol car, the truth began to spill out. A quick check of his record revealed he was Leo's estranged uncle, a man with a history of domestic disputes and a restraining order against him filed by his sister, Leo's mother. He had taken the boy from a park, not with physical force, but with the cruelest form of coercion. He had put Buster in his car and told Leo that if he didn't come along quietly, he would abandon the puppy on the side of the highway. For a 9-year-old boy who loved his dog more than anything, it was a threat that guaranteed his compliance. Not long after, another car sped into the gas station, driving erratically. A woman, her face pale with terror, jumped out before it had even fully stopped. It was Sarah, Leo's mother. "Leo," she cried, her voice raw with panic. She saw her son, safe, clutching his dog, and she ran to him. She enveloped both boy and puppy in a desperate, loving embrace, her own tears mixing with her son's. After a long moment, she looked up, her eyes scanning the scene. She saw the deputies, and then she saw the wall of bikers. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and intimidation. Who were these men? What had happened here? The lead deputy, Sutton, walked over to her and spoke in a low, calming voice, explaining the situation. He pointed towards Diesel, who was standing quietly by his bike, observing the reunion. "That man there," Sutton said. "He's the one who saw something was wrong. He's the one who made the call." Sarah looked at Diesel. She saw the leather, the beard, the sheer size of him, and for a moment, she hesitated. Then she saw the gentle way he was watching her son, the quiet relief in his eyes. Holding Leo's hand tightly, she walked over to him. The other bikers parted silently to let her through. You're the one who helped him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Diesel simply nodded. "I'm glad he's safe, thank you," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing him. Everyone else they just saw a man and a kid. You saw that he was scared. You saw him." Leo, feeling safe beside his mother, looked up at the towering man who had blocked the road. He clutched Buster a little tighter. "You saved Buster," he said, his voice small but steady. Gary said he was going to leave him in the desert. Diesel's throat felt tight. He knelt down, bringing himself closer to the boy's level. It was a gesture that took all the intimidation out of his large frame. He looked at the puppy, who licked his hand, then back at the boy. "No one was ever going to hurt your dog, son," Diesel said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "Not on my watch." He gave Buster a gentle scratch behind the ears, and for the first time that afternoon, Leo smiled. It was a small, watery smile, but it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. The circle of fear had been broken, replaced by a ring of unlikely guardians and the beginning of a long road to healing. 5 years can change a lot. A dusty gas station can get a new coat of paint. A beat-up Corolla can be sent to the scrapyard. A bad man can be sent to prison, his power to terrorize reduced to nothing. And a small, frightened boy can grow into a confident young man. 5 years later, Leo was 14. The slight, quiet boy was gone, replaced by a teenager who stood tall. He was still on the lanky side, but his shoulders were broad, and he met the world with a steady, clear-eyed gaze. The fear that had once defined him had been transformed into a quiet strength, a deep well of empathy for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. He was the star volunteer at the county animal shelter, known for his almost magical ability to calm the most frightened and difficult dogs. Buster was no longer a tiny ball of fur. He was a magnificent, goofy, 100-pound golden retriever whose tail was a weapon of mass destruction against any coffee table that got in its way. He was Leo's shadow, his constant companion, a living, breathing symbol of a promise kept. The connection forged in the heat and fear of that day had not faded. It had deepened. To Leo and his mother, Diesel was no longer a stranger, he was Uncle Frank. He had attended Leo's 8th grade graduation, his massive frame and leather cut looking wonderfully out of place amongst the proud parents in their Sunday best. He had beamed with more pride than anyone when Leo's name was called. Every Christmas, a card arrived at the Iron Sentinel's clubhouse. On the front was always a picture of Leo and Buster, the boy growing taller each year, the dog growing grayer around his muzzle. Inside, Sarah would write a short note, always ending with the same words, "You will always be our family. Thank you for seeing us." But the impact of that day rippled out even further. The story spread through the biker community, a modern-day legend of how the Iron Sentinels had surrounded a predator to save a boy and his puppy. It struck a chord deep within the club. These were tough men, outsiders by choice, but many were fathers and grandfathers. The idea of a child being terrorized through his love for his pet resonated with their own fierce, protective instincts. Preacher, the club's president, had an idea. They weren't just a club that rode together, they were a brotherhood that stood for something. They had power in their numbers, an intimidating image that could be used for good. And so, Buster's Run was born. It started as a small charity ride the following spring. A few dozen bikers from a handful of local clubs rode to raise money for the animal shelter where Leo had started volunteering. They raised a few $1,000s and thought it was a success. But the story had legs. Local news picked it up. The image of hardened bikers riding to save puppies and protect kids was irresistible. The next year, the ride was bigger. The year after, it was a major regional event. By the 5th year, it was the Iron Sentinel's signature event. Hundreds of bikers from all over the state descended on their small town for a weekend-long fundraiser. They collected donations, pet food, and supplies. The event raised tens of thousands of dollars not only for animal shelters but also for a new charity they had founded in partnership with Sarah, a fund to help abused children and their pets find safety together, so no child would ever have to choose between their own safety and that of their beloved animal. The Iron Sentinels were still an intimidating sight when they rumbled down the highway. But now, in their town and the surrounding counties, their reputation was different. They were no longer just bikers. They were guardians. They were the guys who ran Buster's Run. On the morning of the 5th annual ride, Diesel stood near the registration table, a cup of coffee in his hand. The air was filled with the rumble of engines, the smell of leather and exhaust, and the happy barking of dozens of dogs who had come along for the event. He watched as Preacher addressed the massive crowd, his voice booming over the PA system. His gaze drifted over to the volunteer tent. There was Leo, now a tall teenager, confidently handling a leash. At the other end was Buster, his tail wagging furiously as a group of small children gathered around to pet him. Leo was smiling, patiently explaining to the kids the right way to approach a dog. He was teaching them kindness. He was teaching them respect. Sarah stood nearby, watching her son with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. She caught Diesel's eye from across the lot and gave him a warm, grateful smile. He nodded back, a slow, satisfied smile of his own creasing the corners of his eyes. He had answered a call that day, not just the one from his club president, but a deeper one. A call to protect, to intervene, to stand in the gap for someone who couldn't. He hadn't just saved a boy from a bad man. He had helped a family heal. He had given his brotherhood a new and profound purpose. He had started a ripple of good that had grown into a tidal wave of kindness. It all started on a hot, lonely highway, at a dusty gas station. It all started because he trusted his gut. It all started because he heard a little boy's desperate whisper.